I remember telling myself, I don't know how much longer I have, to be really honest with you, because these little legs are not going to be able to hold me up much more. And they were talking feeding tubes. Like I said, my kidneys were starting to shut down and fail. I can tell you I was on multiple medication for blood pressure, in and out of hospitals. I had had a mini stroke at one point. And all the doctors, of course, at this point were saying, this is it. And everything in my brain as a leader said, this is not it. You can't just say and tell me what my life is.
I am with Mairin Moore Kane, and she wrote a book called Rooted, Not Rushed. My wife and I have come to adore her, and I met her husband first and then got to meet, I'm really impressed with Jason, by the way, the fact that he was able to, marry way up. So, but we've gotten a chance to get to know them. We spent time in person. I've heard her speak. I've read the book. It's an amazing journey, and I can't wait for you to get to know her a little bit better. Welcome to the show, Mairin.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me here.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think it kind of goes back a little bit. My husband and I have been in business. I've owned multiple businesses the last 25 years, multiple states. And I have to say, if you were to title me as anything previous to who I am now, if there was a different new version of me, it would be that I was a hustler and I was constantly on the go. I was a perfectionist and I was this can't stop, won't stop. And really, in about 2020, all of that had to stop. I actually hit some chronic illness seasons, and I found myself going from multiple states, running multiple businesses, really leading, and really, we were winning awards for our service and for our numbers in our sales. And I went all that to a complete dead stop. And I found my body said, you can't do this anymore. I was bedridden for 3 years. I went from running about 9 miles a day to really being 90 pounds and almost needing feeding tubes and heart attack, stroke risk every day. My average blood pressure was 200 over 160, and that was with management of meds. And so everything in my life had to completely change. And at that point, I had to really re-identify who I was as not just a individual herself, but also as a leader and a business owner. And I had to rebuild my life from the ground up at that point. And so now I work with women leaders who were already capable and carrying all those same invisible types of pressures. They may look a little bit different, but often in seasons of transition, visibility, rebuilding. And I work with them to reclaim that internal authority so that they can lead clearly without losing themselves, really having to overproduce, and really without having to have that fatigue of chronic illness or other things that creep up on us.
So I have an experience with chronic illness. And I want to know where yours kind of originated from and how you were diagnosed and how you came through that. But it just, as you're telling the story, I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly, but I was on a business trip down to Peru and I picked up E. coli.
Ooh.
And, I've always been a big, strong guy. I fight, we do everything that we do, lifting weights and whatnot. And it went misdiagnosed. And then they gave me, a diagnosis, or not a diagnosis, but a prescription for, Cipro.
Mm.
And people don't realize, like, I was already weak. I was already, in that, but people don't realize that you got to read what the side
Yeah.
effects can be, and Cipro in a pretty large percentage of people, um, has the body attack its own tendons.
Right.
Right. And that happened to me. And I got to a place where I couldn't literally, I remember the day, where I was cause I was in so much pain all the time. This is 3 years and I'm
Mm.
on stages. I get off stage. I would have to lay down. I couldn't, I literally had no more energy when I would get off stage. Nobody knew that I was going through this because, of course, you just don't tell
Yeah.
people. Right.
Right.
And,
Gotta,
what's that?
you got to keep going through that.
And yeah, you just got to keep going. And I remember the day where, because I would take hot baths as often as I could because I was in pain everywhere. And I remember not being able to get out of the bathtub. And I
Mm.
was like, oh my God, out of all the adventurous stuff that I've ever done, I'm gonna die in my own in my own tub. So but it was three years, and it took me a full year to sort of get back through that and get back on top of things. But anybody that has suffered with a chronic illness knows that sense, am I dying? Right.
Mm.
And that loss of hope. And for most people that I know, myself, and I know you have the same spark, it's just like, if I didn't die today, then I'm going to try to figure this out one more day, one more
Yeah.
day, one more day. So talk a little bit about the experience that you went through as you were, as your energy was dropping, as you were starting to lose weight, all of those things. What was going through your mind?
Well, in about 2020, like I said, everything had stopped. And, it was kind of a key time anyway, because, COVID was happening. And so
Mm,
everything had stopped. But here I was still mentally and physically still trying to run businesses. And, it's funny, my friends and I will talk about it to this day, where we were still getting on Zoom calls, and we were like, let's do this business. We have this great concept. And so we were still going. And I was in complete denial. And really, it's interesting because when I reflect back now, all of the things that I was going through, I thought they were all isolated symptoms and signs. Like I didn't
mm,
I didn't see it as there's something that's really happening, until really it was one day. And ironically enough, it started a little bit before COVID, but I was noticing that I was nauseous all day, every
mm,
day. And, I mean, I can get through just about anything until morning sickness. I have two boys that, I brought into the world. And so, morning sickness will take me down. I knew that was going to be the one thing in life that, that was my weakness. And sure enough, the moment I started getting nauseated, that's really when it started for me. And I started noticing that no matter how much I was eating, or how much I was trying to eat, even because I really wasn't very hungry when you're nauseated. Who likes to eat? But
mm,
truly, I went from 140 pounds to 90, and it really felt like overnight. And I just I woke up one day and I couldn't get up. And it started to creep in a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And then of course I hit COVID. And once COVID hits, your body just shuts down entirely. And I spent literally 6 months in bed with COVID, with 104 temperature. And from that point on, my body said, I don't know what you've done to me, but we are absolutely done.
mm,
And I went from in fact, I remember I also am a bath girl. And so I remember I would crawl every day from my bed to my bathroom. Couldn't walk. I was so weak. In fact, my husband, he reminds me now, because a lot of it actually kind of feels a lot like a blur. But there was a time where I was sleeping like 10, 12 hours a day, if not
mm,
more. And my husband would wake me up and he'd try to get me to eat. And of course, maybe I'd have like maybe a bite or two. But at that point, it was gone. But I remember crawling to the bath because I was still trying to recover my lungs from the COVID, and I couldn't do it. And I literally was just so weak. And of course, along the way is the toilet, because I was getting sick and I was
mm,
vomiting. And so I never really made it. And that's when I knew life is changing. I could no longer, I think I was maybe 3 months in, and I could no longer go from my bed to the front door. In fact, my husband and I would try and walk every day. And, I've got this driveway that leads out to our gate, and I couldn't do it. And so he would have to pick me up, put me in the truck, and we would just drive around just so I could get out of the house, because I couldn't walk, couldn't move. I was getting chronic pain in all of the areas of being bedbound for so long anyway. But, just all the things. And then, the other side of that is when you move and your body's not used to it anymore. I was watching my muscles deplete, and I
mm.
went from 9 miles a day, like I said, to I was watching these legs become like little birds. And I mean, I can still visually see my legs. And I remember telling myself, I don't know how much longer I have, to be really honest with you, because these little legs are not going to be able to hold me up much more. And they were talking feeding tubes. Like I said, my kidneys were starting to shut down and fail. We I can tell you I was on multiple after multiple medication for blood pressure, in and out of hospitals. I had had a mini stroke at one point. And all the doctors, of course, at this point were saying, this is it. And everything in my brain as a leader said, this is not it. You
Mm.
can't just say and tell me what my life is. You can't treat just the symptoms. There's more to this. And it was always so interesting. So I have what's called gastroparesis and dysautonomia, among a few other different comorbidities, but those are the main ones. And really, the root of it is that vagus nerve and the nervous system. And my whole entire autonomic nervous system was failing. So my being able to breathe, my being able to digest, my being able to have heart rate, my being able to hold a body temperature, even I was always so cold and I could never ever keep any type of warmth in me. And, all of these meds weren't doing much of anything. And so we were starting to seek outside of the United States for any answer. We found stem cell clinics that we were in. I think, gosh, for 3 years, I can't even tell you how many times I had spent treatments, and almost at that point, our life savings just to keep me alive. So
Mm.
yeah, it was at that point that I realized that I don't know if life will ever be the same again. But at the same time, I will be honest with you, I don't give up very easily. And I didn't realize I had that personality until that moment. And there was a moment where, a very vivid night for me. In fact, my husband had finally crashed. It was about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I always thought it was religious, but it wasn't until, I had had that really hard night. And of course, the TV's playing whatever's on, whatever, I had left it hours prior being sick. And on came on who's now my pastor. But it was this church service. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I don't know if I really want to. And I thought to myself, this is kind of a jip. Like this is it, you know? I didn't give myself a lot of opportunity to speak my voice. I did a lot of people pleasing for other people at one moment in my life. I
Mm.
spent a lot of time hustling for a lot of people for a lot of different things. And deep down, I had so many regrets at that point for myself. And I thought, if I get up off this floor, I'm doing it way different. And I did, gratefully, got up that night, and it's really kind of changed everything. And I don't feel as if I still deal with things every day, but I will definitely tell you that I recognize and I have gratitude for everything in my life a little bit differently. And I get up off the floor every day in a different way with a lot more gratitude.
Mm. God is good, huh? You know,
Amen.
that's
Yeah.
it's so funny or not. I mean, it's funny between you and I because we went through this, but I remember my left arm was 2 inches smaller than my right arm. And I was just getting some new suits done like 6 months ago. And this guy's been my tailor for 15 years. And he was like, you remember back when you had, when your left arm was 2 inches smaller than your right arm? And I was like, I try not to, buddy. I try
Don't
not
remind
to.
me.
They're proportional again now. But yeah, it's crazy. And really, I think I don't know. Again, not to make this a preaching or religious podcast, but sometimes when there's people that are hard headed, because God knew you were hard headed already, right? He knew you had that spirit inside of you, and then tested you.
Yeah.
But it's like I've tried to get to a place in my life now where I don't want to be driven to that point. I just want to be open and listening to what I'm supposed to be doing because I learned my lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that anymore. Well, amazing, amazing. Tell me, what was the turning point, and what were the therapies or the decisions or whatever that led to you getting back on your feet?
I can honestly say I don't to this day know what the turning point was really, other than that night really changed for me. And I kind of made a decision at that point. As it sounds so storytelling right now, but I've reflected a million times on this. And this last year for me has been it's been almost a whirlwind to the point that I've had a few conversations where I feel like I almost have to pinch myself and like, what, am I awake? Because this feels like a kind of a strange dream, to be really honest with you. I decided after that night, actually, though, because I mean, I would call my mom every day and I would bawl and, Mom, tell me what, I don't understand what this is for, what my purpose is in this. And I mean, I was even doing little things like I was trying to paint from bed, any little thing that found purpose for me to keep me excited and to keep me alive and to keep me going. And the one thing that I always leaned into was journaling. And, but I don't know. I was always a journalism major and I love to write. And so for me, that was always really cathartic. And so if I could get it down to paper, then at least I could understand my own thoughts a little bit better every day. And it was the one thing for hours I would do. And so, I just decided that if that's what it's going to be, I'm going to take that and I'm going to share it with the world, because that's the one thing I knew at that point. I didn't want to leave this world without telling my kids, especially, but really I wanted to leave a legacy. Like, if this is really it, I think even a year ago this very month, I was still only 105 pounds. Ironically, I'm now 130. So if that says something, and I've been rebuilding every day, but I had decided that I woke up in, I guess, kind of a fever dream, and I reached out to who's now one of my amazing friends and coaches. And I said, can you help me write a book? So if this is it, I've got something left. And that's exactly what we did is we decided that I would go ahead and put this into the world and I would publish it. And so I brought this Rooted Not Rushed book into the world. And I will honestly tell you, you know, I don't have an answer to why I am feeling better other than purpose in my pain. I really don't. I still, in fact, ironically enough, I was on a show last week for, it was a TV show. And as soon as I left, I got sick again. And so, I mean, it still comes up. It's still every day, but I just decided to do life a little differently. And I have decided that it looks a little bit slower and it looks a little bit more calculated. And, I have to be really boundary and be careful with my health, but I don't want to lay in bed for the rest of my life. And I don't want to assume and accept this chronic illness title that this is what I have left in my life. And I still lead two of my, I had at the time four companies before I was sick, and I now still run two of them. And I have a podcast now, and I decided that if I'm going to lead differently, that's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to continue to lead. I'm going to continue to be the person and speak my voice and lead in all the ways that I have passion for.
I love that. Leadership comes through so much in service. In fact, I wish somebody would have told me that when I was younger. Leading is not being the loudest voice or, the one that's, sort of leading the charge as we traditionally think about it. It's finding purpose with the things that have happened in our life and then turning around and serving other people with that. And I watch you do that all the time.
Thank you. It's
And you,
it's
in your
the love
book,
of.
yeah, your book is definitely powerful. I recommend it to everybody. To pick out a couple points, because I want everybody to buy your book, right? Pick out a couple of points, some of your favorite points of the book, so people know what kind of takeaway they're going to have after they read it.
I think there's leadership isn't just necessarily. I think we so often think that we have to focus on the things that we did wrong or the places that we're supposed to go, and why we're not there yet, and why we're not this person, or why it didn't succeed in certain ways. And really the book a lot in itself is just rooting right here, right now, and not thinking about those other moments, because we so often think that we have to control those moments. And it's really when we let go of some of that, that some of our greatest purposes and some of our greatest opportunities really start to shine and show through themselves. And I think the more gratitude that you can have right here, rooted in that moment, that's really where the difference is. And that's really the whole premise of the book itself. I could tell you point after point, chapter after chapter of what my book is, but
Yeah.
it's just little stories of my own resilience from even from childhood up, letting go of some of my, my family's forgiveness that I had to really go through in order to heal some of that. Um, being able to find my voice again in order to be able to rise differently as a leader, and being able to accept who I am a little bit as well within that, because we aren't just, we think that we should be somewhere else, or we need to be in a faster pace if you compare us to where social media or all these other people say we're supposed to be, right? We're all in comparison, we're all hustling in the world, but in reality we're all just becoming, and we're just really growing into that more and more every day.
I love that. That's so great. And the name of your podcast, it looks like it's behind you there. Root,
Yes, really.
realign, and rise. I like it.
Yes,
I like it.
thank
The rooting part is a fascinating, like it's like a through point of your book, right? Is that rooting, and when you're unrooted, and that, it's like, as I'm just listening to your story, when you're not rooted to, in my life, certainly,
you.
Christ, the Bible, if you're not where's the nutrients coming from?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Where are the nutrients that you're rooted? What are you rooted to? Right? You say people pleaser. There's a lot of people that are out there that are people pleasers. And, you're really like negotiating. Used to look at like what I was doing when I was younger was like almost prostitution. It's like, I'll do this for you so that you'll give me love, you know?
Yes, absolutely, or feel safe, and I think it shows up in all of us a little bit differently. It's interesting because I used to take all of these walks the best that I could, and the times I could, I just remember like sitting there, and they always say, meditate and to really get grounded in that, and I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I knew
Yeah.
how to pray, I knew how to, to sit in silence, but I really had to listen to myself. And so I think that's where the rooting comes from, is and I actually use it in comparison now with a lot of my clients that I coach, is that, if you're like, especially I have a client right now, I was just telling her last week, she's in transition for her company. And I said, think of it like a tree, right? Or you're in different seasons of, the reality is you may have to cut off that branch, or trim some of it off. But the reality is you're not killing that whole tree. What you're doing is a salvaging, because it's just a branch of your whole tree of life. It's just a certain limb of that. And in reality, we still have those deep roots deep in us that are going to grow something bigger and greater in a different season.
Boy, pruning sucks though.
Sure,
It's like, no,
it's very painful.
I want to keep that, God. I want to keep that in my life. It's like, nope, doesn't serve you anymore.
Yeah,
That's
cool.
yeah, that's fantastic. So how how do you think you're showing up, and how do you think this all is going to impact your kids?
I think about that every day. All I can do is just show up in every single day. Some days it looks different. Some days it's strong. Some days it's just saying, in all honest, authentic, God, I'm just here. Like,
Yeah.
get me going, but I think it's different. And for my boys specifically, I mean, it's really taught them how to be leaders as men. It's taught them how to have a little bit of bedside manner for
Mm.
whoever their spouse is later. And it's taught them to not give up as individuals. I think we've all very much grown in our faith together as a family, and also individually. In fact, I have to, brag on he's now 16, but, when a lot of this started, he was, gosh, at that point he was 10 years old, and I had a little guilt because, if you want to get religious, I hadn't even baptized that child of mine.
Mm.
And it was when he started watching me watch things on TV and I couldn't make it to church. He said, "Hey, Mom, can I go get baptized?" And now, ironically enough, he's sometimes the one that drags us to church.
Mm.
And he's a very strong leader in that. And I think it just really, it's taught us all resilience in our own ways. I look at my 21-year-old who's now coaching in physical fitness, and he's now trying to compete. And he went from being, as he'll be the first to tell you, he was very depressed, and he was a little overweight. And I didn't even know he was depressed. And so, I think as men, maybe you can relate to this. Men hold depression differently than women. And it showed up in him, and he recognized it, and it's now something that he has worked through and been honest with himself to say, I'm not going to let it take me down. And so, I'm just really proud of the resilience it shows in whatever time we have, whatever that looks like. It's not really in our control anyway, but really in this circumstance, it just shows us to keep going and to do the very best you can. And really, that's life. And the best you can do is just to show up in it every single day, right here, right now, rooted in who you are.
Love that. Love that. Well, I know Jason, your husband, absolutely adores you.
Mm.
And, that always speaks loudly of the relationship. What were one or two of the ways that your relationship shifted because
Mm.
of what you went through?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be really honest with you. Before I got sick, we went through a really hard time with our business. And wow, I can't believe I'm going to share this, but we actually almost split up at one point.
Mm,
And, there's two things that will put a marriage in strain, and it's financial and sickness.
mm,
And it's in those seasons that you learn most of who you're with. And I will be first to tell you that it humbled the both of us very much, very quickly. And I had imposter syndrome for a long time. Like, man, after 26 years of being with this guy to this day, you know, there was a time where after I thought that we were going to split up, I couldn't imagine my life without him. And I thought, he's going to leave me because I can no longer be this woman. And so that imposter syndrome really crept in. And we have learned not just how to love better and differently, but what true love and true trust is. And really just to show up rooted in that. Just, it's love and marriage is not just in the fine moments of being strong and feeling that, butterfly, feeling every day. It's showing up in those hard moments. And we've shown up for each other in those moments and proved to each other and in ourselves how much we really wanted our life to be together.
wow. That's beautiful.
Mm,
That's
thank you.
beautiful. I love that. And I see it. Like, again, you just got, there's a lot of people that can fake a lot of stuff. And you know me, I don't hang out with fakers. So it's
Yeah.
very short fuse for fakers. But yeah, what a beautiful story. Um, One of the words that I came out of mine with was joy.
Mm,
Um, just as a base, right? Like a place, a home to go to. And I'm like, you
yeah.
know what? I've been doing all these things, and it just boils down to I'm in a tub. I can't get myself out. Like, no matter how strong I was appearing, no matter how whatever it was, there was nobody. I was paying money to get, like, you pay the doctors, you're doing everything trying to figure this stuff out. And it forced me, as it did you, as I'm listening to you, forces you into a place of reflection.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people don't like to reflect, which is why they keep themselves so busy, social media and business and, all the other kind of stuff. And I figured out along the way that my word was joy, that's
Mm,
where, because it's a choice,
mhm.
I could look at it. Yes, I was depressed when I was going through that. Yes, I was in pain. But at the end of the day, it didn't stop me from exuding joy on stage and
Yeah.
sharing and serving. Right. And I think that's what kept me alive. It was that word joy. It's something, when I met Emily, I said, here's
Mm,
one thing, there's a deal breaker, is that your joy, her joy has to emanate from inside of her, which it does. You know her, she's a
yeah.
very joy filled woman, and mine has to emanate from inside of me. And that should enhance each other's joy. And, but I'm not going to sacrifice that for the sake of a relationship. And that was in the very beginning of our relationship. That we just talked about all those things. And now, like, we've never fought. Like, we have a great time. Like, not that we haven't disagreed, but it's just having that one word as my anchor has really changed my life in such a positive way. What's the word that you came out of your experience with?
Gratitude.
Mm.
You know, I think there have been many a moments, many a nights, many a days where I thought maybe that would have been it. And if that was the last moment, what do you look at? You look at the things that you had, right? You look at the things that are sitting in front of you that you don't want to let go of. And all of a sudden, you see how much you love and appreciate the things that you have in your life. And I think that in general, we don't want to necessarily see sometimes what's in front of us. It's a really hard, uncomfortable place to be. But if you can shift that, and I'm not one for that, like fake it till you make it, find the positivity, because really it can sound so cheesy.
Yeah.
When you get right down to the root of it, the reality is we can't control life, but we can control what we have, and we can control how we accept it and receive it. And I knew I wasn't going to sit and be bitter for the rest of my life and think that, this is it. This is chronic illness, or this is, I can't be the same person anymore, and I can't be the old Mairin. No, I'm going to show up and be grateful that I have life and be the new Mairin.
Mm.
That's who I am.
Mm. Strong. I love that. I love it. What a great message. As we wrap up, what's your takeaway? What should everybody take away? And then we'll get into, how they can find you and all that kind of stuff. But what do you think if you're talking to somebody who's going through some kind of a struggle right now? What's the takeaway?
I call it rooted leadership, and rooted leadership isn't about making decisions that are from pressure. It's from clarity, and it looks like knowing your values and letting them guide you. And you don't have to be whole to lead. You can still lead imperfect. All you have to do is be honest with what that value is. So just keep showing up in that and lead right from where you're at. Lead rooted from there.
Great message. Great message. All right. Well, where do people find you?
Mm. You can find me at MairinMooreKane.com, or I'm on pretty much all of the socials at Mairin Moore Kane. And you can also find my podcast, Root, Realign, and Rise. It's on every platform that I think is out there.
I love it. We had a hell of a time getting together. Like if anybody knew how many times that you couldn't make it, I couldn't make it. My plane was late for one of them. Like it was insane. And now I know why, right? Because
Well,
great conversations. I don't think the enemy wants great conversations like this to happen. There's a lot of division. We saw it from 2020 on. We saw, we had conversations back and forth of the way that we were looking at the world and the politics, and I think that made us all closer.
mhm.
As you looked at things differently, I looked at them differently. You offered different I offered and I feel like that is why this conversation needed to happen, because
Mm.
who you are, how you show up, the message that you just brought, the book that somebody can pick up and go through, your podcast that people can find you and watch you on. That's the things that change. Those are the things that change lives.
Yeah,
And
unity from both sides. I agree.
yeah, awesome. Well, my wife and I adore you, and we adore Jason, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And hope everybody goes and follows you and gets your book. And I'm sure somewhere along the way, you and I are going to cross paths again. We usually end up at some of the same events. So I'm
I look
looking
forward
forward to